Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. If you're listening, same thing. Give us like a good rating, right? Like 5 star if you prefer, but four, we'll take four with you. Just if you're gonna do lower than four, just forget about the rating thing. So we got Brian Culley, CEO, Lineage Cell Therapeutics. Okay, we've actually had him on before. We've had him on multiple channels. Uh, he's semi-local to me. I'm a SoCal native, so it's a San Diego biotech. Brian's been a CEO of multiple biotech companies over the last few decades or so. He's very knowledgeable. He stayed at the small biotech level. We're going to get into his career. How does one even do this? Like, how do you even dream of becoming a biotech CEO? And is it a dream, Brian, or is it a nightmare at times?
Fair enough. It's great to be back and talking with you today, Dan.
Yes, so we're gonna get into all this stuff. We're also gonna get into like the challenges of running a small sponsor and a small biotech. Sometimes, there's been and the common theme I've had on this show with people like yourself, Brian, other biotech execs, small biotech execs, they don't often get the respect or the attention of the vendors in the space until they reach a point where the vendors think you're important enough, right? Or for them to even give you attention. And who's to blame them? They're the ones servicing big pharma. Like that's their priority. So you guys have plenty of headwinds going against you. The market right now is terrible for biotechs. It's been that way, what, for the last year, maybe a little longer, like year and a
Oh,
half,
I'm gonna call it 30 months. It's like 2.5
almost
years.
3 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's that like for you? Like, is that worth that can't be fun. Is that worth having this career still?
Oh, absolutely. Because no matter whether the economy or your sector is doing well or poorly, many of us, maybe not everybody, but many of us are motivated by the fundamental work we do, right? We're trying to make new medicines and help people. So, yeah, I mean, the question about, what's it like? It sucks, right? It's much better when capital is flowing and share prices are up like that. That's way better than this. There are, upsides, right? If you're successful in a bad environment, it's kind of a good look for you. But generally, it makes work more difficult, but it doesn't make your work any less important. So it's easy to continue to be motivated, even in a historic bear market that we haven't seen the likes of in decades.
So, given enough time, the good outweighs the bad for
Oh
you,
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, even the failures. You do something, it doesn't work, and maybe like I got an email a couple of days ago. An investment banker said there have been 40 biotech bankruptcies already this year. All right,
Wow.
nobody wants to be among them, but if you are, and it's because your product didn't work, you're still generating important information about what isn't successful. So even the failures in this space, I think, can enrich the space in a way that if your campaign for different shape cereal flakes doesn't increase sales, it's like, all right, whatever. But even when you fail, you're leaving something behind because it's data.
We're gonna get to your career, but do you think macroeconomic factors like interest rates, maybe that's the most simple one, rising interest rates, do they have like a real effect on biotechs? Like, does it
Very
impact you guys?
Yeah, very real effect because the amount of money that flows around sectors in a general way vastly exceeds the amount of money that flows around in a biotech specific way. So we know that biotech is capital intensive, right? Drilling oil wells, capital intensive, right? Is high risk, high return. And in an environment with high interest rates, that's not where you want to put your money, right? You can make 5% sitting in a bank account right now. So it's really hard to invest in high risk opportunities right now because it's not a macro environment that's supportive of that. you have really low interest rates and, you get a little bit of unemployment, things actually look a little bit different for sectors like ours. And so, yeah, it's tough and it's been going badly for a while, but it turns, and that's you can always, resort to that. Eventually, there'll be, the punch bowl will come back into the party, and things will go well. And you got to be able to adjust and understand. I think is really critical. You can't just head down and be like, "I'm developing therapy." You have to be aware of what's happening in the macro world, because at the end of the day, you can only do what you can fund, and if you can't get the capital to do your work, right, you got to pay attention to the macro for sure.
It's the capital and then it's the human resources, right? Like you've also got to compete there for the talent. Once you get the funding situated, now you got to go find the people.
Yeah, I think in the extremes, you find that that becomes more important, right? So if you have a real go-go year and there's a lot of IPOs, you're gonna see people flowing into startups and going after that capital. I'm thinking more executives.
Mhm.
And when things are really bad, right, those people are out looking for work, and the talent pool's a little richer. You can find people with extraordinary skill and experience that maybe wouldn't have been available otherwise. And these individuals also think about their own equity positions, right? They're trying to develop drugs, but they're also trying to be, financially comfortable, or maybe much more than just comfortable themselves. So if they're working somewhere that it was a $40 stock and now it's a $4 stock, and they're looking at that and going, "Wow, I'm not going to make equity here." Professionally, they might say, "Hey, I can work on that lung cancer project down the road." And go get, start over and try again. Because we're in a business that it's really hard to predict the winners, I don't know how risky it is to kind of leave one job and go to another, provided that you can feel comfortable that your chances of success are relatively comparable. So, yeah, there's subtle stuff that affect people on an individual level that does feed into placement and the positions that are filled, and the quality of the talent pool at any given time.
Mm. Do you find that it's the scientists that stick around longer and don't worry so much about the stocks or
That's that's fantastic. Never thought about it before. My knee-jerk reaction is totally uninformed based on nothing, is yes. I I
yes,
I do think there's a little bit more loyalty because, if you're trained in the lab, I was, and you spend your time reading publications and you're in the weekend growing cells or whatever, and you're not learning how to really critically read financial reports. So you might tend to just kind of roll with the punches, and so you just you're working on your science, you're working on your next publication. You might not be thinking so much about how your company's financial situation is. So I think that there could be some, let's call it, accidental loyalty
mm,
on the R&D side
romantic
compared.
loyalty.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great, right? It's you want people who are excited about the company. Are you you know it's not like the people who work in accounting are the first people to leave a business that's failing. At least I haven't seen that, but I think that um I do think my hunch is that you do find more loyalty, but it's loyalty out of, faith, or, ignorance, or lack of experience. And but those, the experience, it's picked up on the bench, right?
Yeah,
These are individuals who know a tremendous amount about really technical things that the accountants, these are words that they can't even pronounce sometimes. So,
yeah.
you have your own area of influence, and your stickiness in an organization can be influenced by whether you're familiar and you think it's a risky place to remain or not. But risk is opportunity. I've had people who've left organizations that I was working at because things got bad, and when things turned around, who gets the rewards? The people who stayed. The people who stuck through it are rewarded for doing so, not just by the stability, but there are equity rewards from making it through the tough times. There are financial rewards that go along with that, as well as the great feeling that you have of making it through with a team, to the outside of the tunnel. So I've seen it. I've had friends leave, and I've had, strangers show up, and sometimes people stick around. You just never know what's going to happen out there. A lot of factors go into it, very personal decisions.
Yes, that so what kinda like, what categories for those not so familiar with biotechs, and I'm gonna reference this book actually when we get into your career. I don't know if you read this yet, from Breakthrough to Blockbuster: The Business of Biotech. This is like a great intro for anyone that wanting to learn more about this. I learned about the tech transfer offices. I didn't realize how important they are to the biotech industry. Like, we're gonna get into your career. I don't know much about it. I'm guessing it had something to do with a tech transfer office somewhere,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Um,
I worked at one and it was great. It was really valuable. I learned a lot in that time.
we're gonna get back to that, but from a
Mm.
CEO now, like there's like two things I want to ask you. Number one, we mentioned scientists. At the stage that Lineage is at right now, what kind of employees are you seeking? Like there's different categories, right? There's scientists. Do you have marketing people yet, or like biz dev? Like, can you give me like just some categories of where people might be able to fit in career wise at one of these places?
Yeah, and I hope I don't leave anybody out. On the R&D side, obviously you've got and I'm going to be general and maybe not super specific to Lineage, but you tend to have your biological scientists, you have your chemical scientists, you may have device people, regulatory, quality, right? These are big functions on the R&D side. On the G&A, general administrative, um, what we sometimes think of as a business side of the house, that's where you're going to find your finance and accounting, business development, marketing and sales. We don't have products for sales, excuse me, for sale. So I don't have a commercial team, but your medical scientific liaisons, all of that. The clinical tends to live on R&D. So these are big sort of corporate functions, and the size and the activity of those functions is going to vary company to company. So for example, I've got a really large manufacturing team because it's core to our technology. We manufacture specific kinds of cells. So I need a pretty robust cell therapy R&D team, but I don't have any synthetic organic chemists because we're not tweaking molecules and using the building blocks of science. So each company is going to have its own framework, and sometimes some of these functions have slightly loose definitions, right? Business development is kind of a bridge between the two sides of the organization. That's why I came up that way in my career. I wanted to operate on both sides. And it varies. Some people really look at their business development folks as deal makers. Others look at the market research and competitive intelligence landscape and have it live in business development, and that's sort of a different function than just getting deals done. So there are a million variations on the theme, but I probably captured most of the big chunky. I guess I left out legal. Sorry, lawyers
Legal.
out there, but
Who needs more lawyers? Uh, MSL is interesting because you don't have, like you said, you don't have a product that you're selling. What do the MSLs do at a stage like your companies?
Oh, we don't, but there could be companies that
Oh,
are
okay, okay.
smaller like us that would have an MSL
I got
component
you.
to their
I got
business.
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think that's
Mm,
very helpful. Like that might be this book in like
did
3 minutes.
it. I'll tell
uh,
you where to send royalties. Yeah, thanks.
so your career, okay? You went to Boston College. You went to UC Santa Barbara for your master's. You got an MBA from Cornell. How do you? When did you know? Like, hey, I mean, your master's was molecular biology. Like, when did you know you want to do biotech stuff, or did you?
Let's see when. So the abbreviated journey is at Boston College. I learned very quickly that I wasn't going to be a doctor,
Wow,
and I kind of went into research because it's cool, right?
it's
I
the
think
next best thing. That's
I think the
yeah.
biological sciences are awesome, right?
Yep.
I still have a nerd badge. I like science. It's really interesting. So I was doing research, and I wasn't great at it. I was fine, right? I was average. Um, and I was thinking about what to do. And so I graduated from Boston College. I went to work at the Scripps Research Institute here in San Diego, and I was running gels, and I was a little bit of a gene jockey, and a senior guy, a PI in that lab said, "Hey, I don't want to see you here 20 years from now, ordering reagents. You need to go get a PhD and, go build a real career. And I said, "Oh, thanks, Sandy. I appreciate the advice." And so I went up to Santa Barbara, and it was at Santa Barbara that essentially changed my mind. And it partly because the career opportunities, it was a really tough time for PhDs. Everybody was spending 6, 7 years to get their PhD, 3, 4 years for postdoc, and then you're a soft money assistant professor at some university you'd never heard of before in the middle of the country. And I thought, "Oh my gosh, that's not how I saw myself," right? I thought it was gonna be different. And so I started doing research, right? I was a researcher, so I did research. I did research on the industry and I asked questions like the one you just asked me. What else could I do?
Mm, mhm,
And I learned a few things and I talked to mentors and I did informational interviews and I read everything I could get my hands on. And I heard about this thing called a gold collar worker, which instead of a blue collar worker or a white collar worker was someone who bridged science and business. They were so going to be so valuable in the
wow,
future. I remember it was some of the Scientist magazine or Genetic Engineering News, something like that. I think it's still around.
wow.
And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool. I'd like to do that." And so I
Gold
tried to
collar, I
figure out
never heard of
something.
that.
Yeah, it was pretty good, right? I think it
Wow,
was like, I mean, we're talking, this is like 96, right?
okay,
1996.
yeah.
So anyway, I talked to some people and one of them was the head of business development at a company called Neurocrine.
Mhm.
And I had already quit my PhD program and I worked at Neurocrine in the lab. So I was doing industry, drug discovery, screening molecules, trying to disrupt these SH2 domains. And it was really fun. But this guy I think he's the CEO at Neurocrine still now, he wasn't at the time, but he said, "Oh, you might want to consider tech transfer." So to bring it back to tech
He
transfer,
told you this,
he was the one,
interesting.
right? The CEO said, "Go work for pharma, carry a bag, detail a drug, learn how to sell," which is pretty good advice, but it
Wait,
didn't
so he
really.
gave this guy from Neurocrine, and by the way, I know him, we've done those tardive dyskinesia studies, I've like, for decades,
Okay.
I've followed Neurocrine, we've worked with him.
Okay. Okay.
I
So
know who
the
it is.
the
So he
former
said tech
CEO,
transfer.
I'll say the former CEO was a Genentech pharma guy, and he said you should go be a rep for pharma, which is pretty good advice, right? But
Wow.
Kevin, who was not CEO at the time, said, "I think you should go to tech transfer." And so I looked into that, and it took me a year to get a job in tech transfer. And it ended up being at UC San Diego. I was a pest. I kept knocking on the door. Got a job, got a job, got a job. Finally, they had something for me, and I got in there and I started. That was me getting out of the lab. I left
Whoa.
Neurocrine as a bench scientist, and I became an early marketing analyst or something. I forget the title, right? In tech transfer, and that's where I learned about grants and contracts and confidentiality agreements and all of the provisions that go into license agreements. And I got to see inventions make their way out into industry, either licensed by larger companies or as the basis to found a startup company and things like that. And I was like, "Oh, this is great. Like this is home." Like I did that for a little while. And then eventually that led to business development, which is a normal progression, right? From tech transfer into business development, and business development led to being CEO, which again is not that unusual. So there was a trajectory that was set in the mid 90s, which took about, I'd say, 4 years to actually implement, but it worked out really well. I was super happy about how my career has gone.
Wow. Okay, so this
Sorry.
2-minute summary, there's like hour-long podcasts in every step there. Uh, so you're doing bench research at Neurocrine.
Yeah.
Like, was the CEO accessible, or did he notice you, or you made it a point to talk to him, or like how did that
Great,
work?
great company. There were only 85 people there. This is like a couple years after their IPO. And so it
Mhm,
wasn't a big company. It was the same company, same size company as I run right now.
mhm.
So yeah, Gary Lyons, he was around, you could chat with him. Um, and if you wanted to, if formally, if you wanted to go in and sit down and be like, "Hey, I'm looking for some career advice," I think he was the kind of guy that would give you that time. But yeah, I was a research assistant one. I was slightly above the guy running the autoclave. But I moved up over a few years. I got some experience. I talked to people that were in business development as Kevin Gorman was, and there were other people in the business development team. And I actually was given the opportunity by that company to spend 10% of my time helping business development. which basically meant getting online, Googling stuff, looking for some numbers, sourcing some information. It was nice, right? It was a really nice investment in me as an individual and my professional interest to be able to throw a fraction of my time into the business development team and what they offer. And I've tried to continue that. I try to give people opportunities where I work, and I look for talent more than necessarily experience. And I think it's, served me well, and it's allowed me to invest in others.
Yeah, I like that strategy. Like, so the CEO basically encouraged you to develop your career, even if it meant leaving Neurocrine,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
I once somebody one time did say to me, employ and I think I might have heard this at Neurocrine, if employees leave for new opportunities and you couldn't offer them something, that's success. It's not necessarily successful for someone to stay with your company for 20 years. It might be successful if you really help them become successful elsewhere, if you can't give them what they need, whether because it's a function or they get capped out or whatever. And I always thought that was really interesting. And when I have had people come to my office and say, "Hey, Brian, I'm going to resign and I'm going to go take this other opportunity," provided that we had a conversation somewhere along the line and I'm not, like, shocked and disappointed, I think it's fantastic. I'm always genuinely happy for them that they found something that's gonna be fulfilling. Often it pays more and things like that. That's great, and,
Mhm.
so yeah, yeah, that's just good management of an organization. It sets a tone and a feel in an organization. You can't be possessive of your employees. You
Right,
wanna
right.
develop them and help them get better, but they might
R-
leave you. That's alright.
Research sites are in the same situation, and there's owners that basically share that strategy and others that don't. They're possessive. I always tend to lean towards with how you are. Hey, you know what? If you want to go start your own site, you want to work for someone, I'll help you do that. Just be honest with me up front, and I'll tell you, like, my honest opinion, how long I think you need to stay here in order to achieve those goals
Yeah.
and have a lower chance of failure.
And they
And
can come back, right?
they
I mean, I've
come
had
back, yeah.
people 5 years, 10 years. It's one of the most rewarding things that can happen is someone saying, "I really would like to work with you again." I mean, there's
Like
no
that.
better compliment, I think, as a manager than someone saying, "Let me know if you ever have an opportunity. I wanna work with you." That's great.
Do you think these are like more, I don't know, like soft skills, right? That a manager has. There's hard skills. Do you think Wall Street appreciates this kind of stuff?
The short answer, no, right? Wall Street is more like scorecard.
Yeah.
But I do think, I hear the conversations about, people say, "Oh, I think the CEO is, has a good team around him or her." I think that there's unity in the boardroom or whatever. Like, these things do get talked about, but they're very difficult to measure. And so I used to think about my career and my profession as bringing together science and business. But I
Mhm.
have more recently expanded that to include the people and the operations. Now I feel like there are four things that are the big chunky categories. Yeah, you have to understand and know the science. Yeah, you have to know and understand the business, raise the capital, all that. The people are really important, and you get better at it over time, trying to get the most from the people and understanding that each person, just like each site in a trial is unique, they got their unique problems and their unique advantages. Same with the people that work at every level in the organization. And then operations. And I think that operations has become something that I've increasingly had to kind of set aside as its own separate category, and meaning like really the nuts and bolts of how you implement your strategy rather than just setting your strategy. Maybe strategy should be a fifth category in there, but
That's
I think
fair.
people take that for granted, that I think people think that it's easy. I don't know. I tend to disagree a little bit.
Maybe strategy is like interwoven through all four of those. Like it just circulates.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good point. That's a very good point.
uh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have like they're all? Do you think all four of these are equally important, or one should be favored more than the other, situationally, or
They do different things. Clearly you have to get the science right, but it's super hard to know, right? You look
yeah,
at a molecule, is it going to work in the clinic? I don't know. Like the best in the business are right one or two times out of 10. So that's different. On the business side, I often say you can only do what you can fund. So it might be a great idea, but if you can't raise the capital for it, I've seen this before. People got brilliant ideas about phase 3 study designs and everything. Great. If there's no money to run it, we're not going to do it, like full stop.
Mhm.
So the money side is kind of different. Ops kind of tolerate ops is about optimization in my mind, right? So you can have a poorly operating company that's inefficient, but if you raise enough money, you eventually get to where you need to get to. It's just not very efficient. So ops is really about trying to get better return through your value creation journey. And then the people, I don't know. I mean, some people thrive in a negative environment. Some people like, conflict, and they feel
Yeah.
that it brings out the best. That's not my style. I can't wear that hat credibly. I can't yell at people for failure. It's just not my style, right? And so, everyone's got their own kind of environment, but what I've been really happy about is that almost universally in my career, I've built organizations where people get along, and I think that helps them, enjoy their work and do more work and be more productive because they're in an environment where they're paying attention to the objective and their responsibility on the team rather than going out there and thinking, maybe I should work on my resume this weekend.
So the tech transfer office, like when I was reading this book, which I do recommend I don't get anything out of it. You guys want to watch, learn more, read this book. You probably don't need it, Brian, but I learned about tech transfer offices, like the concept of that from here. So I always I've been in this industry since '05, so I always understood, okay, well, universities, they have a role. Like they're not very efficient research sites. So I didn't understand, like we could run circles around a university when it comes to study startup, enrollment. Like UMA clinical trial, we're not prestigious. We'll run circles around University of Arizona, study startup, accrual, whatever the IRB, like everything's faster, right? So I was always like, well, why are they even there? Oh, they get NIH grants and this and that. But no, it's this tech transfer offices, like that's a large part of why they're doing it. And that played a huge role, I think, in your career. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you left neurocrine, you went to UCSD, like, so you left like a comfortable job, right? Like comfortable, but it wasn't, you knew like you wanted more.
Yeah, I
And
took a
then
big I took a big pay cut.
you took a
But
pay cut too.
yeah, for
Wow.
sure. Yeah, yeah. But it was an investment. It was a big pay cut. Right? Because I'm going from, a really squared away, high promise biotech company and going into a university environment where, you got to pay your quarterly fee for parking on campus. It's like, wait, I work here, right? Um,
Wow.
but it was an investment. Like, sometimes you go backwards in order to go forwards. That's fine. I was just investing in myself, right? You read that kind of advice everywhere online. So I knew that Neurocrine and most of the Neurocrine-like companies out there effectively had a ceiling, right? What was my career trajectory? Research associate 1, 2, 3, senior research associate, director of research associates or something, right? Managing a bunch of research associates. Maybe in some places, you can become scientist 1, scientist 2, but without a PhD, but it's a long haul. It's difficult. And I wasn't passionate enough about doing the research to say this is what I want to do for 20 years. This is how I want to spend my every day of my life. So I knew that I had to make a change, and I wanted to move over to the business side, keeping biology because I love it, but moving over to the business side where I felt that I had some additional skills that I could bring to bear and be successful in a different kind of way. So it was a step backward in terms of income. I'm gonna I'm gonna take a stab. I really think it was like from like 37 or 39,000 a year to maybe 23 or 24,000 a year. So it was not a
Wow.
small reduction in income. But it allowed me to it was my break from the bench, and it allowed me to learn a whole new discipline. And from a career profile, when I next went, I actually took a sabbatical and I focused on marathon running, but I next professionally went to get an MBA. and I was able to tell a story, right? I was able to go to a business school interview at Cornell and say, "So here's the deal. I used to work in the lab. I did it for a while. I got into a PhD program with honors. I decided to leave. I've had an epiphany. I worked at this industry job for a while. That helped me learn. I went into tech transfer. I learned a lot about tech transfer. I'm now committed to a profession in business development. That's what I wanted to do." And so that story arc was, both informed and empowered by spending time in tech transfer. I got to obviously learn how tech transfer offices work. That has helped me because I did eventually go into business development and I would do deals with tech transfer offices in the university. So I kind of know how that machinery is
Mm.
lubricated. And that was beneficial, but it was actually more powerful and useful for me as a way of bridging from bench research into some kind of business, and so it was really valuable for me professionally, and I enjoyed it. It was really interesting stuff.
So you got the MBA, now you're doing biz dev. You went back to New York, right?
No, I joined a company. So yeah, I got the MBA. It was funny because even on the very first day, I got a little reputation. My first day of my MBA, I was working on a spreadsheet which had a list of like 200 biotech companies in San Diego. Because I was in Ithaca, New York, and I was like, "Well, I'm going back. When I'm done here, I'm going back to San Diego." So I was the guy who on day 1 of his MBA was already working on looking for a job back in San Diego at
Wow.
graduation, right? So it
Were
was
you born in San Diego or you're East Coast guy?
no, I just feel like this is the right
Okay.
home
Yeah.
for me. So yeah, so I mean, it was very mission driven in that way. But I learned a lot. It was great. And then yeah, I came back and I hung out a shingle and said, "Hey, I can do business development." I was looking to become a business development manager. I wanted to work for someone who is a business development vice president. I wanted to learn business development. And I was fortunate that a guy named Neve Caviar, who he's been around. He's done a lot of different things, but he was working at this small company as a vice president of business development. He hired me as a business development manager. About 6 weeks later, he quit and went up to Allergan, and so there was a vacancy, and I just worked very hard. I stayed in touch with him closely. I worked very hard to fill a vacancy in this role without any guidance. There was no real mentorship day to day, but it worked out. I was able to kind of fill that gap, and over a span of some years, I was able to move up from biz dev manager to biz dev director and biz dev vice president. I closed some deals and earned that, and then I was sort of in like then I'm like a card carrying business development guy, right?
But was
So
the this was a small biotech, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
was
yeah.
the CEO worried when this guy left and you were just kinda running that department or
Yeah, I mean, the sneaky story behind the scenes was as new vice presidents were being interviewed, I always said, I don't know about that person. I don't know, right?" I would always try and find negative things about the candidates, right? And this is yeah, I don't think I've ever told this story before. I don't think it's, all that of a crazy of a story, but I wasn't in a hurry for someone to be replaced if I didn't feel good that they were
Yeah.
going to be able to mentor me. And I was looking at the job and I was like, damn it, I can do this, right? There's a lot of market research. I've got legal help on deals. Like I had worked in tech transfer. I was like, I can do this.
Mm.
And so I was able to basically stall and have the company not hire a vice president until I could earn that job. And yeah, it worked out well.
The CEO must have trusted you enough to take your advice or opinion, I guess.
I guess a bit of a gamble, but
Yeah.
as a business development guy, you don't go in with a recommendation and say, my hunch is this will work out. You go in with data. It's a different kind of data.
Mm.
But you say, "This is what I'm seeing in the landscape," I've contact I mean, what is it? It's dating, right? It's like, all right, I sit with a scientist, I learn about the asset. Okay, that's fine because I had a biology degree, I could learn about the asset. Then I need to apply my own ideas around marketing and positioning. And then I need to hustle. I need to get on the
Mm.
phone, I need to call people, go to conferences and say, "Hey, we have this asset, we have this library, we have this target we've identified. We think it could be a good target for drug development. Do you want to license it?" It
Mm.
was it was dating, Through it was technology dating is what I did at Tech Transfer. It was just a little bit without a net. And if I had never closed any deals, probably the CEO would have been like, I think it's time to get someone else in here.
Mhm.
But I was fortunate that, some deals were getting done. They weren't huge, but they were fine. And that
Mhm.
allowed me to kind of move up in the organization. A little bit unusual, right? When people come to
Yeah.
me and they say, "Hey, how do I move from science to business?" Oh, okay. So here's what you do: you go to a company, you make sure that the boss that you're reporting to leaves within a couple of months, and you take their job. That's not career advice, right? But behind that, the notion of looking for opportunities, looking for vacancies and trying to fill those vacancies, because I sat next to someone who was a peer at that company and she elected to kind of see that vacancy as it was like, "Oh, I don't have anyone watching me."
Mm,
Right? And I looked at it as, "Oh, there's a vacancy, I wanna fill that," right? I was just very
mm.
ambitious in that way. And so, that's the career advice to people is look for opportunities to take on more. Show people that you're capable of doing more if you in fact do want to do more.
If you wanna do more,
Yeah,
yeah.
and if you do, right, that you just got and if you can't find those vacancies, ask. I had a
Yeah,
guy, a
yeah.
junior guy. This is a guy, he's got a science background. He is a business development manager at my company, right? So he doesn't wear a lab coat anymore, but he was a very good immunologist back in the day. He was given an opportunity to work with the business development vice president, and he has been doing great. And those two guys came to me the other day and they're like, "Hey, we have this idea. We are thinking we want this guy, the junior guy, to be responsible for X." And I was
Mhm,
like, "That's fantastic. I love it." Right? He saw an opportunity. He's seizing it. How can I be helpful? How can I
mm.
encourage and resource you to be successful in this initiative that I didn't see was an opportunity for your professional growth. So I love that. I did it and I want other people to do it.
Yeah, so you within throughout your story, you basically kinda broke down what business development actually is at one of these small biotechs because, as a site, as a CRO, that's a different meaning. Biz dev means getting studies from my sites, or for the CRO, it means getting studies from sponsors to manage. Like that's biz dev. From biotech, it's very different because it's not as simple, right? It's not as linear. You have to find the scientists first, or even is there a step before that where the leadership is telling you, "Hey, focus like this is like a platform we're trying to develop focus within this niche," or are you just given freedom to like, hey, go find like
Mhm.
undervalued stuff?
I believe that both should exist in most companies. So we did an almost $700 million deal with Roche and Genentech for our ophthalmology program. We had finished a phase 1/2A study in 24 patients. We knew that we wanted a partner. We wanted an ophthalmology partner. We wanted a pharma partner. I mean, we ran a process. It was really clear what success looked like, and we got it. 50 million up front. We're really happy with that alliance. But there are other things that we have that don't have quite the same timing constraints or imperative or urgency to partner. And these are things that we go, "Oh, hey, take this out and just see what's out there, right? See what could happen." And so both kinds of initiatives, I think, ought to exist in companies. You should have from your executive, sort of on high, like, here's our plan for partnering. And then there should also be the sort of opportunistic, spontaneous, because let's be clear. I mean, a lot of business development is waiting, right? You're waiting for the buyer to get more data so that they can make a decision. You're waiting for someone to reply to a term sheet. There's a lot of waiting in business development. So you need to have multiple initiatives going. And I think some of those need to be less structured than others.
Multiple sticks in the fire is what how I
Sure.
call it for us
Yeah.
getting studies. But what about looking for the actual tech yourself, like looking for the IP? Do you is that's biz dev also, right? But like an
Yeah.
earlier
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah, complementary IP. So I've typically worked at companies where we had some sort of foundational technology, right? We were the innovators and inventors of stuff that we would look to license, or we would make more valuable. We would mature the technology and then look to license it in some way. We typically did not look for assets to bring into the company. Although I have done that. I've done some acquisitions where we've brought programs into the company. I've done it through a license and I've done it through an acquisition. And yeah, it's absolutely, that would be very typical. A company looks at its pipeline or what it's doing and says, geez, we can either afford to or we want to have something else, maybe earlier stage. Sometimes
Mm,
companies are looking to package some things together. Sometimes it's complementary tech. Go find me something that'll make this better.
mhm.
All of that gets done through business development. It may be created and scoped by the technical people in the organization, right? Who say, I need a solution to X. But the process of going and finding that is typically managed, in my experience, by the business development team.
So at that very early stage biotechs, the the DNA of the founder is basically what's going to drive the growth of the company, because either you already have the science and the tech, you have an idea, so now it's just hire scientists to implement it, or you have an idea but you don't have the actual IP, so you need to go out and find it at these transfer offices, right? Is that like
Yeah, it that does happen where you will call up, you will basically survey all of the leading tech transfer offices because they all have, they're grocery stores for technology, right? They all have lists of stuff that they got. Sometimes they
incredible, huh?
sometimes they call you and sometimes you call them. And
Uh,
you would reach out to them and he's like, so let's say you're running, Stanford or Harvard's tech transfer office. Hey, Dan, it's Brian. Hey, listen, I need some kind of a editing technology for this CAR T project. You got anything like that over there? Oh yeah, sure, Brian. I got this guy. He actually has done a couple of licenses and it's non-exclusive, and I can get that for you. You want to take a look? Yeah, show me non-confidential information. So yeah, that kind of shopping absolutely does go on. It is all very sort of company specific.
mhm.
Um, so for example, at Lineage, we don't really do any of that because we are manufacturing and we're coming up with our own IP for how we make different kinds of cells. And I don't usually go out to academic centers to try and find complementary technology. But if I want to deliver cells on some sort of a scaffold, I might not have scaffold technology. So I might need to go out to a university or a company and say, okay, how do I access a scaffold that'll work with these kinds of cells? So it really is sort of situational and specific to the company and what they're working on in their stage of development for how often and how aggressively they might look for new technology to come in.
You think it's a system that works, or does this system need to be optimized somehow? Like if you had a magic wand.
Yeah, I've never seen a system that really can't use some optimization. So, yeah, it's slow. I think that's frustrating. I used to say years ago, I think it's changed, but I used to say that universities, tech transfer offices were getting screwed because they rewarded people. It's kind of fundamental when you look at organizational behavior. They rewarded people by how many deals that they did, not by the value of that deal. So I used to try and go get technology and close deals in May, June, because that was the end of the academic calendar. So if I knew that, Jane Smith wanted to try and get 20 deals done that year because she was going to get some little bonus, I would be in there, right, aggressively knowing that she had a deadline that I didn't have.
Mm,
But that that is, kind of, it meant that I could get good terms for something.
right.
If you
And
would
she doesn't care because
and
she's
she doesn't
like,
care,
she just
right?
wants
Yeah.
one deal.
Yeah, and that's true. That's true in corporate too, not just corporate
Mhm.
academia, right? Corporate. It'll be, if you can figure out what someone's rewarded by, you figure out what their leverage point is. So we would do that with academia. Could it get improved? Yeah, I think that I really do think it has changed. I do think that technology transfer offices, I think they used to hire scientists like me because we understood the technology and thus we could convey it to industry. I think what happened is that tech transfer offices over, a 10, 15-year period stopped hiring scientists so much and started hiring business people and saying, look, you can learn the technology, but you need to be able to get fair value for this technology. And it stopped being a case where you could just go drop 50 or $100,000 at a university and get like a 12-month lockup option on technology. And then after that option period, you were kinda like the only one standing in line, right? Because you
Mhm,
had a standstill, and so they weren't shopping it for a year, and so, obviously, who do you wanna do a deal with? The person on the other side of the table who's been talking to you for a year and is interested in doing a deal, you don't need to shop it, but now you don't have an auction. You have one buyer, and so you're just not gonna get the best terms, but I really do think the
mhm.
universities, in general have gotten much better at this. They've gotten smarter and are getting much better terms. But it used to be that you could get pretty good stuff pretty cheaply. But it was
Are they
early. It was early stage. Always been early stage.
do you fear they're investing less in the science and more in the business, and that's gonna stifle
No.
innovation long term? No?
No,
Okay.
I don't think that at all. In fact, I think the innovative side have gotten better. I think that the inventors of technology, i.e. the people who are generate the patents that go into tech transfer offices have become much smarter, very savvy, and that they're not just inventing stuff because it, I feel like this is such a gross generalization and everyone's gonna like blow me up on this, but I feel like it used to be that you would do science for science sake, try and figure out how things work, and every once in a while you'd stumble across something interesting, and that would plop into a tech transfer office, and maybe it became a technology. Now I feel like there's a lot more intentional research that's done, and it feels like it's a lot more about or it's less about trying to figure out how things work and more about trying to find things that are useful. And so I think there's a far more sophisticated academic environment today,
Mhm.
understanding that through the work that you are doing to further research, educate students and all the different things that you have, publish all the different tensions and competitive forces that you have, I think that people in the backs of their minds are always like, yeah, but I want to come up with something useful, and then they get that stuff in the tech transfer and then hopefully it goes off, and but it's more mature, and that is why I believe you hear much more sophisticated conversations around the valley of death, right? 20 years ago, tech transfer offices didn't talk so much about the valley of death because they were 50 miles away from the valley start. Right now you hear it all the time because they want to go farther, they want to make stuff more valuable, they want to do translational science, and they're trying to figure out how to get across the expensive part of that. So I think there's been a tremendous advancement
Mm.
in the tech transfer office, how they view their finances and the economics of their deals, and also the kind of technology. So I don't think it's stifled. I think it's actually been enriched.
So once we get through this current, I guess it's a bubble that's bursting, right, of biotech, you're bullish on the future of this industry. Like, you think
Yeah, I mean the size of the NIH grants don't there's such a lag, right, between these cycles, these investment cycles, which might be 1, 2, or 3 years in the worst case. You just can't pivot that quickly, right? As an academic or a research scientist, you're not like, "Oh, I'm working in cancer, but oh, you know what's really hot right now? Crohn's disease. I'm gonna drop everything in cancer. I'm gonna start a new project, Crohn's disease." Sometimes you luck into it because you happen to have an asset that might have some relevance,
right.
and you see that in academia, people write a grant and they're send it off to the Crohn's Foundation because they think there's application in it. But you can't just pivot as quickly as that most of the time. So I think really what happens is you tend to be a little bit more lucky that the bull cycles kind of come into you rather than you chase them. Chasing them is really hard to do in science.
I see. Right, we're gonna get back to how you became CEO and all that, but um, what about repurposing drugs? Is it the 501c pathway or something like that?
Might be thinking of 505(b)(2).
There you go. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I confused with all these 510Ks, all this nonsense.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So I've like as a research site, we do phase 2 through 4 studies. The last couple of trials, maybe it's anecdotal, maybe it's not. It's only been these kind of drugs, like repurposed drugs. Do you think that's gonna get bigger going forward, or do you
M
think this is like
my
just the moment we're in right now?
Yeah, are macro factors that are, there are macro factors that are out there that I think can be, driving the kinds of early stage, but by the time you get into the clinic, Again, it's years, right? So if you're repurposing, maybe you're just reformulating, you're still going to need a few years to get into the clinic with that program. So you can't really time the cycles in that way. So
Mhm.
I think it's probably coincidental. Um, you can have an accelerated timeline, but you also typically don't have the same addressable market as a really innovative and novel asset. So I've been able to successfully file an NDA for a reformulated cancer drug, and it's fine. It worked really well, and it didn't require a lot of testing, but it was never going to be a commercial. It was never going to be a big commercial success because it was just an incremental change. So I think that's the trade-off, right? It's just everything has to be beholden to the laws, immutable laws of risk and reward. You can't
Yeah.
have you can't have fast, cheap, high quality, and huge returns. It's the math doesn't work.
Yeah, well, there's companies that do nothing but this, which is why I ask: Is this like something that's gonna have growth, or is it just what's happening now?
Yeah, I might approach that if I worked in that kind of business and I thought I was gonna make just any number, 15%, do a lot of them,
Mhm,
right? But if I'm gonna do something innovative, I'm gonna make 150%,
mm,
I can get farther with one.
okay, good answer. So, biz dev worked your way up, CEO. When like you always had it in your mind, right? If I'm gonna go for it, I'm gonna go CEO, or it just happened that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this kind of a leadership thread, right? I was like freshman high school class president, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
I've always kind of felt like, oh yeah, I might be able to lead. I'm a little bit of, I got an ego. I like my ideas, right? Okay, so that's fine. Um, but what happened, and again, you can't advise people to do this. I was working at a cancer company that failed and it was going out of business. I was the business development guy, so I was the closest thing to a salesperson that the company had, and the company was going out of business. So I was still employed because I could sell tables and chairs and laptops. I was being hired, or excuse me, I was being retained to put the company to bed. The only other employee at that time was the general counsel, right? The lawyer, because he had certain roles to play for a company that was going out of business. As it turned out, kind of on the side, I was working to raise capital, and I was working with our board of directors or our chairman of the board, and I was able to raise $3 million to keep the lights on. So we avoided uh, implementing a plan of liquidation by 3 weeks. We were 3 weeks from committing to bankruptcy,
Wow.
and we brought in $3 million. And we invested that in a program. We had to do some manufacturing stuff, and something that we did worked out, and that allowed us to raise $6 million. And then sometime after that we raised 11, then we raised 19, and we started growing. During that period of raising that money, I went from being the vice president of business development and one of two employees to I became the interim CEO. It was like, well, geez, the guy's doing the
Mhm.
job, he's taking all the risk. I was responsible for the public filings, and I said to the chairman, I'm like, hey, I have professional risk. Like, I'm signing off on the financials here, but I'm just the business development guy. Like, don't you think it's time? Right. So eventually I became interim CEO. Maybe a year later, I became full CEO, and I built that company up, and we acquired some assets and stuff like that. So it was in some ways it was similar, that there was a vacancy and I stepped out. I could have just sat there, sold the laptops like I was told, taken my 10% for everything that I sold, and gone and looked for a job. But as I said, I was ambitious and I was looking for opportunities, and I saw it was a can't fail situation, because if the company went bankrupt and out of business, nobody would have blamed me. It was futile. But if I
Mhm.
could rescue it and rebuild it, there was a real opportunity there professionally to put my stamp on some narrative of a turnaround guy or a corporate builder or something like
Yeah.
that. So it was looking for the opportunities to do sensational things, and professionally, that once you raise money, people say, oh, now I guess you're a CEO. And I
Wow.
just tried to get better. I didn't really have a lot of like clear mentorship. I just really tried to pay attention and just get better and better over 15, 20 years of this.
The crisis that turned the opportunity. Do you think was it Was it because that you believed in the science, or was that, like, not even in the question at this point?
Wouldn't that be romantic? Yeah, no, um, so what I did believe on the scientific side is that we should stop pursuing the failed drug.
Mm,
I think that was the problem that the company had. I think that's what killed the company is it had a phase 2 failure and it continued to kind of pound away at that story. What I did differently was I abandoned that story. I said, "No, that's not fixable. I don't know what's wrong. There's 7 things that might have gone wrong in that study, and I don't know, which it were, and I can't afford to fix them all or test them all." So I said, "We leave that," and in this case, we went after a 505(b)(2), right?
mm,
I needed a 20 patient trial. I needed some, small drug supply,
mm.
and that was enough, right? And we built a
Quick single.
yeah, yeah, we got up over 100, maybe up to
Mm,
150 million market cap from, it was a single digit, right? And some things went well, some things went poorly, but I think I spent maybe 10 or 11 years in that environment, kind of reinventing a couple of times with different programs, and I was given an opportunity to do that because I had shown some capacity for this business that I was building credibility, that if something failed, I was honest and straightforward about it, and when things were successful, we were
sure.
rewarded for it, so
So at that point, like, the science is not working, you guys really have nothing. It's just a team at that point, the asset is just the people, right? Like,
yeah,
and
it was
the
it was me and this one other guy,
that's it?
and then yeah, yeah, it was just a two-person company,
And
but
this was not
we had
public traded or pub
it was a public company at the time, yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
I know it seems crazy, but and we had to fight not only against bankruptcy, we had to fight against, delisting and, all these problems, but we had
Wow.
some consultants, there were some other people around the table that were helping, they just weren't employees at the time, and it wasn't this way for a very long time, right? I mean, the company had, it had 50 some odd people, it went down to 2, and then it built back up to 50 some odd, over
Mm,
some period of some multiple years. So, there were resources available to do this. Ultimately, we ended up acquiring an asset in sickle cell. We ran the largest sickle cell clinical trial that's ever been completed, and unfortunately, that was a phase 3 study. This gives you a sense. You go from bankruptcy to running the largest ever trial in a tough
pivotal.
indication, right?
Pivotal, yeah.
And it wasn't overnight. This is years, right? Reinventions and everything. That phase 3 was not successful, and so the company goes back down. So the roller coaster goes up and down and up and down. It's really, really difficult, but,
Wow.
you gotta give yourself some opportunities to be successful along the way. You don't just kinda sit there and hang out as a tiny little company. You take a few bold risks here and there. If they're well timed and well thought through, and one of them pays off, that can be a platform to the next level.
Mm, okay. So then you did that even though it failed. I'm guessing this was the first stint at CEO? There was a second
Yeah,
company,
yeah,
right?
we sold that company after the failure. We sold that company, and then I was unemployed, and I went to
You
it's fun
sold it? Who bought it? There's nothing, or was there
oh,
some stuff with the
no,
company?
there was a phase 2 asset in
Oh, okay.
heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. It wasn't
Uh,
a huge sales, like, it was a value of, like, 37 million to a company called Sevara. Um But then I was out of a job, right? I wasn't needed, and so I went and it was kinda like charitable. I found this little public company. It was an OTC, right? It was not on a major American exchange. It was an OTC traded but public company working in malaria.
mm,
And, I had some personal runway from my first stint as CEO, and I worked on the malaria company for a little while. They had a difference of opinion. The owners of that company wanted to go down more of a crypto path, which is not what I do. I didn't have particular interest in that. I really wanted to embrace a malaria strategy, a regulatory strategy that I identified. Um,
crypto? What do you mean
yeah,
crypto? Like,
using coins as currency at a time where,
cryptocurrency
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
biotech?
Yeah, using a coin as a currency rather than a revenue stream like through royalty having the value of a drug asset be tied to a coin which itself is traded separately. This was
Wow.
at the time all the rage. It again, it wasn't I had no experience in it. It wasn't any
Mhm.
personal interest in it. I want to make medicine. I want to make the human condition better. So that business was I don't know how long I spent there, maybe a year and a half. And then I got a call, LinkedIn, somebody found my bio on LinkedIn and said, "Oh, let's talk to this guy." And that was for the company where I am now. That was 5 years ago. And
Lineage.
yeah, I
Wow.
did an interview and took that job, and things have gone very well since then.
Who comes calling? Like, you don't need to name names, but in those situations, was it the
It
board?
was a junior person at a small recruiting firm, and that recruiting firm had been hired by the chair of the executive search committee, right? So
I
the board of
see.
directors says, "We're going to look for a CEO." They hire a recruiting firm. The recruiting firm's running around. They have someone junior who, is looking at LinkedIn. And they looked
Mhm.
at LinkedIn, and I had a profile that caught their eye, and they said, "Hey, you wanna hear about this company?" And I thought, I mean, I guess, I was looking at stuff. I had some interviews going with some other things. Nothing was really great, but there was some okay stuff. And this one was funny because this company, it looked to me to have a lot of problems, quite frankly. And I thought, well, I don't really know that much about cell therapy, but I've learned a lot in my experience now. And this looks like a place that I could change a lot of things.
Mm.
And I think for the better. And even if it doesn't work out for me, if I spend a few years here, just making changes, I'll have a chance. And if not, I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna face a lot of really interesting stuff.
Mm.
And what happened was, a lot of the changes I made, I think they were good. We changed the team, we changed the focus, we changed the assets, we've been changing the investor base. And then we had a lot of success, and we actually generated some clinical data that's quite extraordinary in one of the leading causes of blindness in this country. And so I'm now sitting as CEO of a company that I thought was, kind of a not a great company when I joined it, and now I feel like it's massively underappreciated. I think it's amazing. So yeah, this is, but it's in part because I had a lot of experience. I had, I feel like I had 60 years of CEO experience in just 10 because I went through some real shit. So, that can be helpful. Those bad times, you learn a lot.
What yes, you do. What's, like, the first thing you do when you get to this company? Are you in the weeds looking at the science? Are you looking at where the money's going? I mean, what's, like,
You
you know,
do
that
you do nothing. That's
do
how I approach it.
nothing?
You do nothing, change nothing. You just talk to people, one-on-ones. "Hey,
Huh.
how you doing, Dan? Tell me about, what do you see? Look, new CEO, I'm just here to learn, I don't wanna disrupt anything. There'll be some change later. You should know there's gonna be some change coming, but I haven't really formulated it. It would be inappropriate of me to think that I know from the outside what's
Mm.
going on in here." And so what I would learn is I'd learn around power centers, I would learn about the assets that are promising, I'd learn about the skeletons in the closet, and then you develop a plan. I mean, I had some ideas from the outside, right? I
Mhm.
generally could look, and some of my hunches were validated, but I think the best thing you can do as a CEO is not try and put your stamp of influence on in day one or week one or month one. I think you just figure out what the hell you just signed up for, and then you can, bring your experience and your ideas into play.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Wow, okay.
But that's a little different, to be fair. That's a little different than what I told the board of directors that I was interviewing with.
Mhm.
My message to them is, I think there are 10 things that need to be changed here, and if you're not going to back me on 8 or 9 of them, let's not do this. Right? And that was a little bit of, I wanted to convey confidence. I wanted to convey that I had some ideas. I talked about what those ideas looked like. Some of them were a little unsettling. Not
Mhm.
every board member is going to view the ideas the same way. But what I was trying to say is, if we're going to do this, if you're going to hire me and we're going to do these general ideas of what you and I think are important for the company, let's not do it halfway. We got to really commit to these things. And they said yes, and they stuck by that, and we did them.
Do you go with details, or is this like high level stuff at these conversations?
I think each conversation would have been a little different with each board member, but I would generally say that, we knew we wanted to acquire a certain company. We knew that we wanted to divest a different company. We knew that we wanted to get three, or I knew that I wanted to get three cell therapy assets together under one umbrella. I had, some views of other assets that I thought should be starved or terminated. Those are a little bit more delicate, right?
Mhm.
It's you come in and you show up and you're like, I think you should change the color of your house. You're like, whoa, 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 Um, so some of them were explicit, and those are the big chunky ones that you focus on. And others, I thought this is going to take some time. And others were surprising. Like I did not know going in that I was going to relocate the company to San Diego, but it became clear that that was a good idea after I'd been there for a while.
For the talent base or number of different reasons?
I realized that there were a lot of personnel changes that I wanted to make, and I wouldn't be able to tap into my network because the company was in the Bay Area.
I
I
see.
didn't really know anyone in the Bay Area. And so I couldn't really get people down here in San Diego to fly up like I was flying up every week to go to work.
Yeah.
So it was, and the rent, I mean, it was just way too expensive up there. Like we're in Carlsbad now. It was super
Wow.
affordable to do what we were doing. So, it was a business case. And I went in front of the board and I said, this is the case and this is why I think we should do this. And, they said, okay. It was actually surprisingly easy. I thought it was going to be harder. I thought there's going to be some, I don't know, some historical just allegiance to the
Mhm.
Bay Area, but there wasn't. They understood that this made sense. And it did make sense. It was the right thing to do.
Interesting. You you ever worry, "Hey, I can't give these guys all my ideas, they'll just take it and, like, not hire me," or
Yeah.
no?
No, these guys are really this board. The board's evolved a little bit, but smart and successful people. Some of them operators, some of them more investors. A mix,
Yeah.
but very bright and almost universally successful individuals. And so they weren't interviewing people in order to get ideas. I think they wanted an operator. I think they wanted someone who would come in, take the ideas, and then actually drive them through to completion. And that's why it's described before about you got to know the science, you got to do the business, you got to know the people, but the operations, you got to know how to manage an operation and actually implement these ideas in order to be efficient, create value.
Maybe it's awkward. I don't want this to seem like you're stroking your ego or anything, but how many CEOs have all those 4 things, like, covered? Do you think you're unique, or do you think this is, like, quite common that
Not unique, not
mm,
unique at all. I think where I feel a sense of being a little bit advantaged is that my scientific background is strong, right? Like, I was going to UC Santa Barbara in a PhD program in molecular cellular and developmental biology, and I'd had years of experience in labs at Scripps Research. I was working in the lab, as a junior at Boston College. I was, authoring papers, right? So I pay attention to science and I've got a good scientific background. And I've got, in particular on the board, some folks who really understand macro in a way that it'd take me a lifetime to learn this stuff. So those are the sort of the two fringe ends. You got to pull it all together. So I don't, there are CEOs out there much better than I am. That's not the question, but I think that one of the things that allows me to feel confident in recommendations or decisions is that I really am bringing the vision on both the science and the business and integrating those in what I think is the best possible way. And if you leave one of those behind, I think it's just harder. So
mhm,
that's where I feel a sense of privilege and advantage in my decision making. But this is an industry, that what is it, the numbers 90% of things that go into the clinic fail. So
yeah,
it's really easy to fail as a CEO. It's a lot harder to succeed as a CEO in this industry.
yeah, par for the course is fail. Um, you've been there 5 years, right? 5 years.
Next month, yep, next
Next
month.
month?
hmm
How would you assess how you've done so far?
You're setting me up. So I I I want to recognize that CEOs are largely scored by the value they create while they're making decisions. So if you were to look at the share price over 5 years, someone would say, "Well, you haven't really created anything, Cully." And that's how Wall Street keeps score. Okay, that's fine. What I would say to that is, it was pretty tough because when I joined the company, a lot of people were frustrated and they didn't want to hear from a new CEO. So the first thing that happened when I joined is the stock completely plummeted. So my basis, my starting point is kind of unfair because I came in and the stock tanked, right? And I came into a situation where there were a lot of problems that were not well known by the investment community. So I think if someone could go on the journey with me, and some of my employees I hope would feel this way, I think they'd be like, guy is doing a really good job. But from the outside world, it's hard to see it. But how many cell therapy outside of cancer, how many cell therapy companies do you know that have a $670 million deal with a company like Roche and Genentech? Not too many. How many CEOs can make it through the bad times as well as the good times? There's a lot of companies out there that have gone down 95% in our space. I was told that 40 companies went out of business so far this year in biotech, small cap biotech. 40 have gone out of business. So, it's a really tough question because what you measure depends on how you measure it. Um, but I think that if I weren't doing well, they wouldn't keep me around. So I think I'm setting us up for success. I want this company to be very successful, and I'm doing the best I can with limited resources and pulling everything, all this experience that we've talked about today, to bring to bear and outside people as well to try to make the best possible decision and really make this a great company.
Yeah, good answer. I mean, I haven't followed the stock very closely, honestly, since our last interview, but judging by the comments on the last interview, they were overwhelmingly positive of you as a CEO. So try to check that out when you get a chance.
Well, I'm
When you're
look,
feeling down, there that's
I'm
the
I'm open.
community's there.
My joke is you can't win, right? Because people
Yeah,
people will be like, "Oh, I think this guy does too many podcasts," and then someone else will say, "Yeah, I don't think this guy is telling the story well enough or often enough," right? You just can't win. You have to have a
right.
thick skin. You have to understand that from the investor perspective, the second they hit buy, they are committed to they think that that is the time to buy, and they get very frustrated the
Mhm.
stock doesn't go up immediately. And it is human psychology that if the stock goes down, you're gonna wanna blame the CEO. You're not gonna wanna blame yourself for making a bad decision. If the stock goes up, you're gonna credit yourself with making a good investment decision. You're not gonna give credit to the CEO. So this is an
Right.
asymmetrically terrible job because no matter what happens, we go from $1.50 to $15, and people be like, "Well, you should be at 25." So there's no winning, but I didn't get
Right.
into it to be, a stock guy. I got into it to develop something valuable. The stock will reflect the value I create with the team and the decisions that we make. So, that's the key to success here. Make medicines that are valuable, that aren't deficient, that are going to sell a lot. People are going to look at that and be like, huh, I think you're mispriced. Let's fix that.
Hmm. Yeah. Fair answer. Very good. Everybody go connect with Brian underneath. I think when it's all said and done, I mean, CEO of a publicly traded company, on top of that in the biotech space, does not sound like fun to me. Um, but we need people like you, I guess, to push this industry forward. I mean, you've got to have people like you that are out there saying, "Hey, you know what? Like at the end of the day, this is what you said at the beginning of this interview. It's still worth it. Like I'll still take, doing this over anything else because of what could happen if we do this the right way." So I think we need more leaders like you running these biotech companies, science focused, and I mean that's your foundation is the science, and then you've honed those other skills on top of it. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story, the career advice, the lessons in this biotech space. It's a work in progress. We're in the middle of maybe the worst of times right now, at least short term. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but we'll
Hey,
be out of this.
I very much appreciate it. I love what you're doing to help people out. I had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers when I was younger in my career. And if any of this that I've talked about today is going to inspire and help someone who's going through the similar kind of journey, it worked out. I'm really happy with what I do. I love what I do. I think it's important work. I think it's going to be successful work, and I'm delighted to be able to share some of my experiences, and hopefully they help people with their own journeys.
Ah, thank you so much, Brian. Everybody go connect. Brian's LinkedIn is underneath this video, and if you're listening on the podcast, thanks again, Brian.
You bet. Take care. Thank you.